When a black man or woman is unjustly killed by someone who's white, there's riots, there's hashtags. Well, why does it seem like that's not the case when the roles are reversed and the black person's not the victim, but the perpetrator of the crime? Well, let's talk about it. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video on this channel. My name is Chase, and in this video, I want to dive into a topic that I've been asked probably about more than any other question when it comes to these issues of dealing with race, and that's what about black crime? Now, usually this is in reference to what's referred to as black on black crime, or when a black person commits some evil, heinous, murderous crime against someone who's white. And people usually say, you know, why is it that you care so much about this violence towards those who are black, but when the violence is caused by someone who's black against people who are white or other black people, you seemingly turn a blind eye to all of that? Well, before I dive all the way into this question, let me just say, I do actually have a problem with the whole notion of black on black crime. That's because I think the term itself is a little misleading and vilifies the entire race in and of itself. I mean, statistically, and actually when I mention any statistics, I'm gonna put a link in the description to where I got these statistics from, but statistically, you're more likely to have a crime committed to you by someone you know than just a completely random crime. And so if you're white, you're more likely to be murdered by someone who's white. If you're black, you're more likely to be murdered by someone who's black. But yet for some reason we have this notion and this idea of black on black crime, but why is there no such thing as white on white crime or Asian on Asian crime or Latino on Latino crime? Like, it's a misleading title that I think vilifies an entire race. But for the sake of this video, I'm calling crime that happens in predominantly black areas by people who are black against people who are black as just black crime. And also crime that people who are black commit on people who are white. So just for the sake of ease in this video, instead of having to nuance that every time I say it, I'm just calling it all black crime for this video, even though I don't really like that title. Okay, with that being said, let me offer 6 responses to this question, what about black crime? I'm gonna try and go through all of these quickly, and each of these could be like 30-minute podcast on their own. But let me just start with the first one. The first one is this: untimely loss of life is always sad. You know, if a person gets murdered, whatever the instance might be, if someone's life is cut short, it's always heartbreaking. And if we find ourselves more heartbroken by the untimely death of someone who looks like us than someone who doesn't look like us, then we need to check our empathy meters, right? I believe as a Christian that 1, we're called to weep with those who weep, and 2, every single man and woman and child on the face of the earth is made in the image of God. And so really the loss of life is the death of someone who's made in the image of God, and therefore it's heartbreaking. One of the arguments that I hear raised all the time when it comes to this conversation is, why does the mainstream media always cover the loss of a black life at the hands of a white individual 10 times more than the loss of a life of a white individual by the hands of a black individual? And a lot of times when people say, why is the media not talking about this? They're sharing links where the media is talking about that, but that's a whole nother issue. If there is unjust coverage when someone of a certain race is killed, then of course that's wrong. But that leads to the second point. Untimely loss of life is not all that's being protested. Now, I'm kind of going to jump into current events a little bit here. The topic of this video, I don't want to make it about a specific current event, but right now when this video is being made, we're still feeling the ramifications of the protests that started with the death of George Floyd. And so one of the things that I've been seeing shared ever since May are people sharing articles of when white individuals were killed by black men or women and saying, where are all the protests and riots over this? The most recent one, of course, being just last week at the time of filming this, when a 5-year-old boy was murdered by a man who was black. Now, again, don't lose sight of what I said in point number 1. Any loss of life is tragic and terrible and heartbreaking. However, these aren't one-to-one comparisons, because what's been being protested ever since the death of George Floyd is not just the death of George Floyd, but it's the lack of accountability that comes with deaths like that. So for example, in almost all of the stories that I've seen being shared where a white individual was murdered, the murderer has been caught, charged, and is either spending the rest of their life in prison, a large significant portion of their life in prison, or, you know, much worse, depending on the state where they live in. However, that same accountability is not often seen when the victim is black. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that any white person who goes out and kills a black person, they're not going to suffer the ramifications. What we've seen for decades and decades and decades are black men and women who have been killed, and there hasn't been that same justice being served as a result of their killing. So when I see articles of someone who was white that was killed by someone's black, and the person sharing the article is saying, where's justice for this person? I would say, well, justice has been carried out. Now, sometimes I think what people mean is, where is the vengeance for this person? Because even with the George Floyd incident, we have a lot of people who have lost focus of what justice is, and people are beginning to seek vengeance instead of seeking justice. But if we're looking for justice, then justice is carried out through the legal system, and that's what's 9 times out of of 10 carried out in these cases that are being shared as a response to the injustice being protested. All right, so on to point number 3. The third thing I want to say is almost every Black person does care about crime within the Black communities. I always hear people say, where are the protests over this innocent bystander that was Black in a neighborhood that was killed? Or where are all the protests against gun violence and gang violence within inner city Chicago or Detroit or Baltimore or St. Louis or whatever it might be? Now here's the deal, and this is why I'm kind of laughing at this. If you ask anybody who's Black, I said almost, but I'd say pretty much anybody, they're going to say that they're heartbroken over the gun violence and gang violence that are happening within our communities. The difference is we're labeling it as gun violence and gang violence instead of Black on Black crime. See, Black on Black crime carries with it the inference that Black people are killing Black people simply because they're Black. No Black person is killing another Black person because that person is Black. Usually when that violence is occurring, it's two gangs going against each other or other stuff like that. And here's the thing, here's the catch. That stuff is being protested all the time. Like you go to inner city community events, you go to predominantly Black churches, and one of the things that people are always talking about is the violence within their communities. So to say that violence within the Black community is not protested against is not just simply wrong, but it's an indication that those who are outside of the population that's hit the hardest by all of this care less about the violence on the streets than the violence in the suburbs, right? Like whenever there's a school shooting in a suburban area, why is it that those get the national attention when the majority of those victims are not Black, but the only time that the sadness of the loss of Black children's lives is brought up is in retaliation to the arguments against the other injustices that are committed? It's disheartening to hear people say, why do you not care about violence within the Black communities when that's at the forefront of every conversation almost within those communities? And there's so many organizations that have been formed and songs that have been made and movies that have been made that are trying to speak out against all of that violence. So to say, why do you not care about that violence at all is just, again, it's not just wrong, but it actually goes to show that whoever's making that argument doesn't seem to care as much about Black lives. And again, I'll put some resources down in the description of this video to show that there's other statistics that back up the fact that Black people do care about the violence within our communities. I mean, this isn't a political statement at all, but there's a reason that 72% of people who are Black are advocates for tougher gun laws. Again, this video isn't to tell you what to think about guns. It's just to show you that there's an overwhelming attitude that shows within the Black community that people are striving for laws to be changed in order for Black violence to be decreased within their communities. So to say, why do Black people not care about violence within their own communities is again, just simply wrong. I spent longer than I wanted to on that point. So let me go to point number 4. And point number 4 is this: statistics about Black crimes are misleading and hypocritical. Here's what I mean by that. You might have heard a popular stat that last year there were 7,000 murders that happened in the United States. 40% of them were committed by African Americans. And so people will run with that stat and say, hey, what's going on here? 13% of the population is doing half of the killing. Like, what in the world is going on here? But what we're not seeing is that last time I checked, there's about 47 million Black people in the United States. Basically what that means is that about 0.001% of Black people are the ones that are actually doing the murdering, which, to flip that statistic, means that 99.9% of people who are Black that live in the United States are not out there killing people, which again goes back to my frustration with this term Black on Black crime, because it villainizes an entire race. It makes it seem like we're all out there either killing people or getting killed or wanting to kill people and gangbanging in the streets. So to say that 44% of the murders are committed by someone who's Black is absolutely true, but those statistics are often used in a light to show that Black people are more violent than those who are white, which just simply is not true. And let me share a couple other problems with why these statistics are flawed and hypocritical, is because it also ignores the patterns within other communities. Let me just give a couple. Hate crimes based solely on race. There's about 7,000 of those as well. And it's documented that people who are white commit 60% of those, and that the leading victims of those are people who are Black. Mass shootings who are white. Now, listen to me, please. I'm not trying to share these statistics to vilify the white race. I'm sharing these statistics to show that it's hypocritical to share those same kind of statistics to talk about Black on Black crime while ignoring the fact that same statistical evidence can be used against those who are white. But at the end of the day, I don't think these statistics are helpful anyway because of point number 5. And that's that Black crime is a symptom of a much larger problem. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, people living in households with income below the federal poverty threshold are twice as likely to commit a violent crime than people in high-income households, regardless of race. Okay, so when people are in areas that are more poverty stricken, where there's less access to mental health, where there's lower qualities of education, they're more likely all across the world, regardless of their race, to end up gravitating towards violent crime. Statistical evidence. Now, we live in a country where the poverty rate amongst those who are black is twice as high as those who are white. The reason why the poverty rates are skewed the way that they are is because of years of what we call systemic racism. If you don't believe that exists, watch the documentary The 13th. But if you don't believe that laws were structured in such a way after slavery to keep black people down and that the ramifications of that are still felt to this day, then you're just ignoring facts that are out there as well. I'm not using that as an excuse. People do have individual responsibility for their actions. So if someone murders someone, yes, they are responsible. But what I'm saying is that their action is a symptom of a much bigger issue called systemic racism. So it makes sense that these areas that are lower educated, lower income, and less access to mental health are committing these crimes. I mean, there's studies that have been shown that the kids that are living in the inner city that have a day-to-day experience with all this violence have similar PTSD than those who went overseas and fought in different wars. I mean, people seeing their friends gunned down in the streets, of course that's going to harden them to the violence of this world. And then that cycle is just repeated. And there's so many other things that we can talk about within the fact that this is a symptom, not the cause itself. I mean, I'm not even gonna get into it in this video, but one of the things that's rarely talked about is where are these kids getting the guns from? I mean, there's these kids on the street that can't even afford their own meals for dinner are somehow affording military grade weapons. Like, something's not adding up there either. And then you add into the fact that for many kids in these inner cities, it's actually safer for them to declare an allegiance with a gang and get plugged into that lifestyle than to not be plugged into that lifestyle. And so this is not an excuse for black violence that's happening in these neighborhoods. But what I'm saying is that this violence is actually a symptom, not the problem in and of itself. Okay, so that's 5 things. Number 6, this argument is almost always a deflection. See, the reality is, and I've mentioned this already, this question, what about black crime, is almost always offered in light of the outrage of the unjust killing of someone who's black. Like, it's so crazy. I mean, there could be a terrorist attack in the United States and no one's gonna say, hey, you can't be mad about that terrorist attack because you do know that most murders are committed American on American crime, so you can't be mad about this outside murder. Like that argument is just ridiculous. But what I'll say, kind of to summarize this whole thing, if someone wants to compare the two, the unjust killing of those who are black and the crime that's happening in the black neighborhoods, and say, why don't you take care of this problem first, and then we'll take care of this problem? If you want to do that, by all means, be my guest. But then what I would tell you is that you need to be actively plugged in on fixing this problem over here that's in the black communities. And you don't have to be black to be actively against the violence that's going on in the black neighborhoods. I mean, you can get plugged into mentorship programs. Almost every city has a mentorship program where you can mentor the youth that are in that city, because many of these problems are stemming from the fact that so many of these kids don't have father figures or parental figures in their lives. And so if you want to be outraged over the violence, get plugged into a mentorship program. Go volunteer in predominantly black churches that are doing everything they can to fight against the violence in their communities. Volunteer in the juvenile prison systems and leave an impact on the youth that need some positive influence in their lives. Last summer, I got to be a part of going down to death row in Ohio. It was a life-changing experience because you hear of death row and you think, oh, these are the most hardened, evil, demonic people that are on the face of the earth. Once you put not just a face with those people that are on death row, but you engage in conversation with them and you hear about the experiences that got them to that point in their life. Yes, they did the crime and so they need to do the time. Yes, absolutely. But it stops you from just vilifying them completely, and instead it makes you want to get plugged in and do everything that you can to stop people from ending up in that situation. And so in summary, what I want to say is, if you're someone who feels the urge to gravitate to deflect from the injustice that we see happening with police brutality and all sort of that stuff with what about black crime, then get plugged in with those people, man, because once you put a face with those kids who are at war in their own neighborhoods, you're not going to be using those kids as a deflection against other problems, but you're going to do everything you can to get plugged in to solve those problems as well. Thanks for watching this video. This is something that I'm pretty passionate about because, like I said, it's something that is always being brought up to me. But if you disagree with me, that's great. I'd love to know why. I'll leave a comment in the comment section below. If you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And as always, I will see you on another video.